Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone is having a good Sabbath. Been really enjoying the weather this week. A little bit hotter now, but the break was very pleasant and appreciated that. Starting to feel like the feast weather, which is appropriate for what we'll be talking about today. So there are quite a number of biblical verses that are more likely to be chosen as a memory verse or a person's favorite verse or as a theme verse for a media publication or event. Certainly among those verses would be Romans chapter 12 and verse 2. In Romans 12, verse 2, Paul writes, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." There's incredible depth and meaning in this one verse, and it's easy to see why it is often used as a focal point for personal inspiration or teaching or communication on different topics. I'm one of the many who have turned to this verse and more broadly this chapter many times and have learned from it in many different ways. Today I'd like to focus on one of the words in this verse that has two distinct elements that are helpful in framing the message of God's plan of salvation that are pictured by his festivals. So today, as we prepare to begin observing the fall festivals in 2 weeks on the Feast of Trumpets, let's consider two aspects of the renewal that Paul wrote about in Romans 12:2. So let's begin by considering what renewing means in this verse, both from the context and from the literal definition. The first portion of the verse says, not to be conformed to this world, which means don't let your mind and character follow the pattern of the age and the time in which you live. William Barclay's commentary summarizes this part of the admonition as, don't be like a chameleon that takes its color from its surroundings. Instead, Paul says, we are to be transformed. That's changed into a pattern that's different from what's around you. William Barclay points out that for us, this change primarily takes place in the inner character more than in the outer form. At any given time, the spiritual mindset and values of whatever society we live within are not fully reflective of God's mindset and values. With God's help, we are to continually be seeking to conform to the pattern that he sets rather than the patterns around us and within us that reflect both human nature and Satan's influence. The next portion of the verse says that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Often, when we hear the word renew, we think of the results of renewal. Something that is cleaned up, refreshed, refurbished, strengthened, restored. And there is truth in that definition of understanding what renewal means. One of Merriam-Webster's dictionary definitions for renewal is to make like new, to restore to freshness, vigor, or perfection. So in one sense, that is what the word means, but it's also a partially complete understanding. Those words like refreshed, and replenished, and restored are primarily about the outcome. Don't get me wrong, the outcomes are great, but they don't just materialize out of nowhere. They result from a process, and the process is part of renewal too. The word renewing in verse 2 is a Greek word which, according to Blue Letter Bible's concordance, means renewal, which is the outcome. So it's the shiny, lovely thing that everyone loves to see at the end. For example, a home that's been renewed. But also, the word means renovation, which is the process. Thinking about renovation brings a picture that's a little bit more involved than just freshening things up a little, doesn't it? Lots of us enjoy the various home-related shows available on HGTV. On these shows, whether it's Property Brothers, Fixer Upper, Good Bones, or others, whatever your favorite happens to be, when these people say that they're doing a home reno, they're not talking about painting and hanging some new curtains. They're talking about lots of tools and time and lots of dust and debris mixed in together in a process that takes time before a wonderfully renovated home emerges weeks or months later. Many of you have experience with some major home renovation projects. Lots of people have either the skills or the personality to tackle it. We have pretty intentionally avoided that for the most part in the homes that we have owned over time, and some of them wound up needing more renovation than we bargained for anyway. Regardless, though, of how we individually choose to approach it with our homes, we can't really avoid the need for renovation in the course of our spiritual lives. Both the Merriam-Webster and the Blue Letter Bible's definitions of this word translated renewal indicate that it describes an extensive and complete change for the better. Mounce's Expository Dictionary of Old and New Testament Words describes it as a change that takes place at the deepest recesses of the human heart. So how can we embrace the process and ultimately attain the blessings and the benefits of the desired outcome? Well, the first way is to learn that there are seasons, different seasons of spiritual renewal and renovation, and accept each season as it comes. The description of life's many seasons in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 3, includes a time to break down and a time to build up. There are seasons of spiritual breaking down where the structural framework and maybe even some of the foundations of our character need to be removed and rebuilt. In different seasons, the renovation process is more focused on degrees of refinement, when, as Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 4:16, the inward man is being renewed day by day in a more gradual process. The intensity level of some seasons is well outside of our spiritual comfort zones, and our natural tendency is to resist those seasons when they come. As difficult as it is, our task is to accept each season in its turn so that we can apprehend the growth and development and ultimately the spiritual fruit that it brings. The second way is that spiritual renewal and renovation is not a DIY, do-it-yourself kind of project. We need to use the relational resources that God has provided us with. Many of us tend to be spiritual do-it-yourselfers when we're facing the growth and development opportunities that we encounter throughout life. I know that that is my default, and I'm pretty confident that I'm not alone. Rather than rely on our relationships with God and one another, somehow it seems like a better path to work it all out on the side and then maybe tell people about it when the work has finished and there's the results to share. It takes many of us a lifetime to internalize and accept that God is in the business of spiritual renovation. And He wants to walk with us in every step of the process, not just when the outcome of the work is all wrapped up. In Paul's letter to Titus, chapter 3, verse 5, he wrote that God's saving work in us is through the renewing of the Holy Spirit. When we remain in a relationship with Jesus Christ, He is actually doing most of the work of the renovation in us through the Spirit, as He explained in the parable of the vine and the branches recorded in John 15. He is the vine that sustains, and we are the branches that receive and produce. And His word prunes and cleanses us as through the Spirit so that we can ultimately produce much fruit. Now, staying in the theme of the parable, the branches aren't designed to produce fruit as some random unconnected individual entities. They are a spiritual community with one another, all connected through the vine itself. We need each other all of the time, but especially when we're deep in the work of spiritual renovation. Anyone who's done even minor maintenance projects around the house knows that they become tedious and wearying pretty quickly. For a lot of this, by the time you get out a few tools, you're already winded, ready to sit down and take a break, drink some lemonade. Especially when the work is extensive, it's critical that we not go it alone and rely on God, on one another, and on other support resources that can augment the process with encouragement in specific areas of expertise that align with the work that God is doing in our lives as well. So to conclude, let's tie these concepts into the fall festivals that we're leading up to. Excitement is building, and rightly so. With that excitement, let's also remember that as wonderful as the festivals are in the hope and promise of what they picture, they also represent a massive, global, not just renewal, but also renovation effort. In the lead up to the events that these festivals picture, especially during the period of turmoil that culminates in the return of Jesus Christ, no one, including God's people, will be in a spiritual comfort zone. So as we're rejuvenated by the hope and the promises of this season, and as we enjoy the abundance of the spiritual harvest season, let's also prepare for the incredible work of spiritual renewal and renovation that is yet to come. It's really difficult to undergo extensive change for the better, especially when it's you and not somebody else. But we can practice and develop those skills by accepting each season of renewal and renovation as it comes, and by using the relational resources that God has provided us with. As we do, we can fulfill the admonition by Paul in Colossians 3:10 to put on the new man, the person of renovated character, we might say, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him.